Hi everybody, my name is Simon Todd. I am the creative force behind Monty Dots Limited, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit more about our brand new role-playing game called The End of Kings. It's going to be kick-started very soon. It's set in the British Isles, it's set in the 17th century, so you have the English Civil War, you have muskets, you have swords, you have the undead, you have monsters, and you have spellcasting. So it's a definite alternative history. So we're going to take a look today at skills. We're going to have a look at the character sheet first. Some of you may be quite familiar with all this. It's not again, as I've said in previous videos, I'm not reinventing any wheels anywhere. So you start off with this character sheet, and if you have a look, all of the skills listed have been separated out into the different attributes: strength, dexterity, power, intelligence, constitution, charisma, and combat. I've separated combat again for ease of use. Two things that you need to do at the beginning when you're generating your character. First, you figure out the modifiers based on the attributes. These are modifiers to the skill percentages. So, for instance, if you have any attribute that's over 12, then per point over 12 you add 2% to the skill. So let's take, for example, like I've put on the sheet, if you've got an attribute strength of 14, then you add 4%. That's 2 points over the 12. You add 4% to a strength skill. So this could encompass everything from boating to using a blunt weapon to using a polearm. So that's the first thing you're going to do. So you go to the bottom right hand of the side of this sheet and you work out if there are any modifiers based on the attributes. It's really cool if you've got high intelligence, because you look at the great big long list of intelligence based skills that will all get a bit of a modifier on them. Okay, on top of that you'll also start off with a reservoir of skill points to throw at everything here. How you do this is based on how you want your character to be and what class they have. So if you're going to be a fighter, then you're going to want to bung an awful lot of that reservoir onto the combat section. Makes sense. You've got two ways of figuring out what that reservoir is. The first one is a straight 280 points that everybody gets. So the second way is by taking the two prime attributes. So for instance, if you're a fighter, your prime attributes are strength and constitution. You add those together, you multiply by 10, and then that's your reservoir. So they're the two ways of doing that. If you have a look at the enlarged section on the right hand side, you can see, for instance, it says archery based on dexterity, and it starts off with 10%. That means that anybody picking up a bow and arrow, even if you don't add any more skill points to it at the start of the game, you'll always have at least a 10% chance of being able to use a bow and arrow. Okay, so on the next slide here I'm going to go over in a little bit more detail the other modifiers that you're going to use when you're initially putting the character together. On the far left, this is an important one and may seem to be a little bit restrictive, but trust me, it works. Characters are unable to have a starting spell casting or divination skill higher than their power score plus any modifiers. Okay, so if you've got, let's be really mean, let's say you've got 10 power. That's the maximum amount of spell casting or divination points you can throw at the table. Okay, so when you're writing out your table, you have a look under intelligence, you go almost to the bottom and it says spellcasting 0%. No one can cast a spell from the start. If you are a spellcaster and you've only got 10 power, the maximum you can put onto that table is 10% of the reservoir. So you'll start off with a spellcasting skill of 10%. Same with divination. If you have a look under the power section, divination's in that as well. Okay, things get a bit better if you've got something like 15% power, 15 on your power. That means that you can add the 15 power plus 6% from the modifiers. Have a look at the middle section of this slide. Remember, add 2% for per attribute point over 12. So if you've got 15 on your power, that means you also have those 6 percentage points. that you can also add. That means that you'll start off with 21% in your spellcasting or divination skills possible. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I'll go into spellcasting later on in another video, but just to remind you that there's plenty of other ways that you add further modifiers in game to actually increase your ability to be able to cast a spell, and the same goes for all the other skills as well. On top of that, there are other modifiers that you can add to this initial list before you started playing the game, based on, if you have a look on the right hand side, based on the actual character class that you've chosen. So let's choose a Warlock. A Warlock is a court spellcaster, equivalent to the magic users in other fantasy role-playing games. All Warlocks, when you're filling in this sheet, yes, you add 10% to your ability to brew potions. You also actually add 10% to religion. Okay. You add 5% to alchemy, and then the rest of these, education, Latin and Greek, all start at your intelligence times 3. That is not taken out of your reservoir at all. None of these bonuses based on character class are taken out of the reservoir. They're all in addition. So when you start off as a Warlock, if you've got let's say 15 intelligence, that means that your Latin skill will start at 45%. I hope that makes sense. Okay. So finally, we're going to be, well, not finally, the next section is going to be looking at how do you actually perform a skill. So if you've got, for instance, let's take climbing that's on this list here. If you've got 45% skill check that you've written down for climbing, you roll a percentage dice, and if you roll equal to that number, if you roll 45% or less, then you've succeeded in your climbing. Okay, if you roll over that, then you failed. If you look at the table to the bottom left on this slide, you can see there's something even more interesting here, because you do have perfect skill checks and you have catastrophic skill checks. Your current skill check is the red line on the middle of this row. So let's say for climbing 45%, that is your current skill check. You roll under it and you succeed. If you roll within 5% under it, that's from 40 to 45, then you've done a perfect skill. If you roll 95% or more, then you've done a catastrophic failure. So if you've, for instance, climbing a wall, it's got 45% chance, base chance, but the wall's got lots of handholds, which the game master then gives you an extra 10% to your skill check. So now you've got a 55% chance of success. The perfect skill still goes up with that, so it's still at 5%. So you've got between, in this case, you've got between 50% and 55% chance of a perfect success. The perfect skill is never more than a 5% window. Okay, just to clear that up. This is a section from the book itself. If you have a look at the climbing, the character class on the list is basically the more favourite character class that is likely to choose this. It's not necessarily completely restrictive. In some cases it is, it's up to the game master. So climbing, outlaws, clubmen, which are basic grunt soldiers, and soldiers will possibly use climbing. I could include woodcairn in that as well. Social rank, anybody can climb. Restrictions, there aren't any. Critical failure, that's 95% or more, and that is an instant fall. Perfect skill, no further dice checks are needed during the climbing on this occasion, and other climbers watching you climb gain a 10% bonus just because they've seen where you put your footholds and your handholds. Okay, so that's how that works. At the end of a game session, how do we increase our skills during the game? So during the game, for instance, what I've got here is a before and after. On the left hand side you've got merchant barter. The character has successfully rolled 40%. That's their current skills. Okay, they've got a 40% chance of being able to do some merchant trading, and during the game they were really successful at it. So you put a little X next to merchant barter, and then at the end of the game you roll a dice. You roll the percentage dice, and if you roll over your current skill check, so they get to the end of the game and they roll 73% on their dice check, which means they've rolled over their current skill check. That means they've learnt something new. Then they roll a 10-sided dice and they add that to their score. So in this case, during the game, they were successful in some trading. They put an X next to their character. At the end of the game, they rolled the percentage dice. They got 73%, which is over their current skill, which means they learned something new. They rolled a 10-sided dice. They got a 4, and they've added that to their total skill. Similar thing happened to the long blades, because they must have encountered somebody with a mortuary sword, used their mortuary sword, was successful, rolled something like 70% at the end of the game session, which means they learned something new. They've added 6 percentage points to that skill. Okay, so that's how you build it up. This feature of rolling over your current skill check, if you can imagine, for instance, the bottom of the page, it's got wrestling at 70%. It's going to get a lot harder for you to roll in that window of 71 to 100. So as you develop your character, as their skills build up, it's going to get a lot harder to learn new things. Okay, so I think that covers everything to do with the use of skills. I hope it does. We are going to go into further details to do with combat, and also we're going to go into further details to do with spellcasting on other videos, but for the time being I hope that's explained enough. I hope you have a nice day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.